My parents said I wasn't their son unless I gave them half my grandfather's inheritance. I made them regret that ultimatum. Look, I'm going to start this story with something my dad said to me when I was 22. Something that still echoes in my head, like a bad song you can't shake off. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not a marshal, Ethan. You're just Grandpa Joe's mistake." Now, before you start feeling sorry for me, let me paint you the full picture. In my family, love was measured by, well, I honestly don't know what it was measured by. Definitely not by understanding your kids' dreams. And definitely not by my weird obsession with old jazz records and spending summers on a farm. My parents always thought I fell out of the wrong nest. Probably from a nest where instead of wise owl hoots, there were saxophone solos and dirt under your fingernails. See, I had this sister, Olivia. Perfect Olivia. She was born with what I like to call the genetic roadmap of family expectations already programmed into her DNA. While I was out back helping with farm chores during visits, she was inside studying business management and speaking in corporate buzzwords like she was born in a boardroom. My parents looked at her like she was their retirement plan wrapped in a Harvard MBA. Me? I was the family's question mark. The what went wrong conversation starter at dinner parties. But here's the thing about being a family oddball. It teaches you to find your tribe elsewhere. And mine was about 60 miles down Route 66 at my Grandpa Joe's citrus farm. That place was my sanctuary, my Vatican, my Disneyland, all rolled into one sun-baked piece of American heaven. Grandpa Joe's farm wasn't just a farm. It was what he called his citrus memory station. This weathered roadside stand that looked like it had been frozen in time since 1962. The smell there was something you couldn't bottle or replicate, like childhood summers and old heartbreaks mixed together. It was pure nostalgia mixed with California sunshine, and a dash of diesel fumes from the old Route 66 trucks that still rumble by. It was the only place I didn't feel broken just for being me. Grandpa Joe never made me feel like I needed fixing. He had this philosophy about lemons that stuck with me. Every lemon, Ethan, has its own story. It's seen sun, rain, wind, and it knows its purpose isn't just to hang on a branch forever. The old man would point to those rusty Coca-Cola billboards down the highway and tell me stories about the golden age of American road trips. He used to say every mile of Route 66 had its own soundtrack, and every drink sold there its own legend. Grandpa Joe wasn't just growing citrus. He was cultivating memories. His drinks weren't just refreshments. They were stories in a glass. He told me about the original Sunburst, drinks that made Route 66 famous in the 60s, when every rock on that highway had its own song. He described how the real Sunburst drinks tasted like freedom itself, blended with a hum of engines and the sweet aroma of adventure drifting from roadside diners. Naturally, being the naive kid I was, I tried to recreate this magic at home during visits. Big mistake. Huge mistake. My parents looked at my citrus experiments like I was cooking up a science project that might stain their rug. "What are you planning to do with your life, Ethan? Live like a vagrant selling drinks on the highway?" my mother would ask, her voice dripping with disappointment. I felt like I was trying to sell jazz music at a classical funeral. While Olivia was networking her way through college sororities and internships, I was learning the difference between Meyer lemons and Eureka lemons from a 70-year-old man who wore suspenders and quoted Mark Twain. My parents saw Grandpa Joe as this eccentric old coot filling my head with impractical dreams. But to me, Grandpa Joe was the only person who understood that success isn't always measured in quarterly reports. Sometimes it's measured in the moments when someone takes a sip of something you made and their whole face lights up. The old man had this way of making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. He'd hand me a glass of his latest creation and say things like, "The secret ingredient isn't sugar, Ethan. It's paying attention to what matters." Or he'd look out his citrus groves and mutter, "A tree doesn't worry about being the tallest. It just focuses on growing strong roots." These weren't just folksy sayings. They were life lessons disguised as casual conversation. Every summer, I'd spend weeks at the farm, learning persistence, authenticity, and the art of not giving up when everyone thinks you're crazy. We'd never talked about inheritance. Grandpa just liked to teach, not to plan funerals, which made what happened next even more shocking. One Tuesday in October, I got a phone call that changed everything. Grandpa Joe had passed away in his sleep. I stood there staring at the phone, half expecting him to call 5 minutes later, with one last recipe idea. The funeral was awkward. My parents showed up wearing their appropriate grief faces, the kind you practice in front of a mirror. Olivia spent most of the service checking her phone, probably managing some business crisis that couldn't wait for a family funeral. The real earthquake happened the following week, when the lawyer read Grandpa Joe's will. I'm sitting in the stuffy office that smelled like old leather and legal documents, expecting maybe to inherit his old truck or his collection of jazz records. Instead, the lawyer adjusts his glasses and announces that Joseph Joe Marshall has left his entire citrus farm, Sunburst orchard, to his grandson Ethan Marshall. The silence in that room was so thick you could have served it with crackers. Then came the tsunami of family rage. My dad's face turned the color of an overripe tomato, and my mother started sputtering about how the old man wasn't thinking clearly, and how Ethan must have manipulated him somehow. Olivia, for the first time in her life, looked genuinely shocked. Her perfect composure cracked just enough for me to see something that looked almost like hurt, but it was quickly replaced by her usual calculating expression. "This isn't fair," my mother declared, her voice rising like a fire alarm. "That farm should be divided equally. Ethan doesn't know the first thing about running a business." My dad didn't miss his cue. He launched into the usual tracklist of my failures. He's never held a real job. He's never shown any responsibility. He spends his time playing with fruit like some kind of... He didn't finish that sentence, but I could fill in the blank. The lawyer, bless his professional soul, calmly explained that the will was ironclad, properly witnessed, and legally binding. Grandpa Joe had been of sound mind when he wrote it, and he'd specifically included a clause about his reasons for the decision. Then came the demands. "You need to sell that farm and split the money with Olivia," my mother insisted. "It's only fair. Or at least give her half ownership." I looked around that stuffy office, at their expectant faces, at the legal documents that represented Grandpa Joe's final wishes. For a moment, I almost caved. The pressure was immense, like standing in a wind tunnel of family guilt. But then I remembered Grandpa Joe's weathered hands teaching me about soil pH and his quiet wisdom about staying true to yourself. "No," I said quietly. "I'm keeping the farm. It's what Grandpa Joe wanted." The explosion was immediate. My mother's face went white, then red, then something approaching purple. "How dare you? After everything we've done for you." My dad stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're selfish, ungrateful, and completely irresponsible. You want to throw your life away on some broken-down farm?" My mother screamed. "Fine, but don't expect us to be there when you fail." "We're done," my dad added, his voice cold as winter. "You made your choice. You chose that old man over your own family." My mother delivered the final blow, words that would echo in my head for years. "You're no longer our son. Get out." For 22 years, I was just their backup plan. Now I was disqualified from the family game entirely. It was a verdict that severed the last threads holding me to the Marshall family tree. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just made their love very, very conditional. Walking out of that lawyer's office, I felt like I was leaving one life and stepping into another. The old Ethan, the one who desperately tried to fit into a family that never had room for him, died in that stuffy legal office. The new Ethan was about to be born on a citrus farm 60 miles away. I drove to the farm in Grandpa Joe's old pickup truck, the one he'd left me along with everything else. It smelled like gasoline, lemons, and freedom, a combination that should have been weird but somehow felt like home. The farmhouse was exactly as Grandpa Joe had left it. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, half filled with cold coffee that had a thin film floating on top. His reading glasses were folded next to a newspaper open to the sports section. It was like he'd just stepped out to check on the lemon trees and would be back any minute. But he wasn't coming back, and I was completely, utterly alone. The first few weeks were brutal. The farmhouse was too big for one person, and my footsteps echoed through the rooms like a constant reminder of my solitude. I'd never lived alone before, and the silence was deafening. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the house settle and the wind rustling through the citrus groves. Money was tight, tighter than I'd ever known. I sold some lemons at the local farmer's market, but the profits were just enough to buy a couple packs of crackers and some canned soup. Freedom has a price tag, and it's not always about money. Sometimes it's about discovering you don't know as much as you thought you did. My hands, soft from years of desk jobs and academic life, quickly developed calluses and cuts from working the farm equipment. Some days, the physical exhaustion was so intense it felt like I was carrying the weight of Atlantis on my shoulders. But there was something oddly satisfying about the pain. It was honest pain, earned pain, not the emotional pain of never being good enough for people who were supposed to love you. The local community was friendly, but distant. They knew I was Joe's grandson, but they also knew I was the city kid who'd inherited a working farm without knowing how to work it. I could see the polite skepticism in their eyes. Let's see how long this one lasts. Some nights, I'd sit on the front porch with a glass of whatever citrus drink I'd managed to mix together, watching the sun set over groves, and wonder what Grandpa Joe had seen in me that my own parents couldn't. What had made him believe I could handle this responsibility when I could barely handle my own life? The farm felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. There were routines Grandpa Joe had never explained, equipment I didn't know how to operate, and agricultural mysteries that seemed to require a PhD in citrus science. I was learning everything the hard way, through trial and error, emphasis on the error. Slowly, something started to change. Maybe it was the routine of physical work. Maybe it was the silence that forced me to think instead of react. Or maybe it was finally being in a place where I didn't have to apologize for being myself. The lemon trees didn't judge me for being different. They didn't care that I preferred jazz to pop music, or that I found more meaning in a perfect citrus blend than in a perfect quarterly report. They just needed water, sunlight, and someone who cared about their well-being. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, even if I had no idea what I was doing. Grandpa Joe used to quote Twain, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started." I definitely started, even if I had no clue where I was going. Grandpa Joe had left me more than just a farm. He'd left behind a legacy, a challenge, and a puzzle I hadn't even begun to solve. But the orchard had secrets, and I was about to dig deeper than I ever imagined. So there I was, living the dream. Well, if your dream involves waking up every morning to the sound of absolutely nothing and wondering if you've made the biggest mistake of your life, days stretched out like molasses in summer heat. I was working my tail off, but the results were about as visible as my social life, which is to say, non-existent. The thing about farming is that nobody prepares you for the sheer amount of stuff you don't know. Like, did you know lemon trees have moods? Because mine seemed permanently grumpy. I tried talking to them like Grandpa Joe used to, but they were either playing hard to get or completely ignoring my desperate pleas for a decent harvest. I'd stand there in the morning sun, coffee in hand, having full conversations with citrus trees like some kind of agricultural therapist. Come on, guys, work with me here. We're all we've got. The trees, naturally, said nothing. Professional poker faces. Every last one of them. My daily routine became a comedy of errors that would have been hilarious if it wasn't my actual life. Wake up at dawn, check the irrigation system that I barely understood, prune branches while secretly hoping I wasn't killing anything important, and spend evenings Googling things like, why are my lemons weird colors, and can citrus trees sense fear? The farmhouse felt like it was swallowing me whole. Every room echoed with my footsteps and the ghosts of conversations I'd never had with Grandpa Joe again. His presence was everywhere, in the way the coffee maker gurgled, in the stack of farming magazines by his favorite chair, in the faint smell of Old Spice that still clung to his bedroom. I was running on fumes and stubbornness. The money from selling fruit at the farmer's market barely covered gas and groceries. Some weeks, dinner was crackers and whatever citrus I could stomach. Turns out, you can get pretty sick of oranges when that's your primary food group. My hands looked like I'd been wrestling with barbed wire, which, Honestly, it wasn't far from the truth. The worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial stress. It was the silence, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of direction. Grandpa Joe had made farming look like poetry in motion. For me, it was more like trying to write Shakespeare with a broken pencil, while blindfolded. I started questioning everything. Was I cut out for this? Had Grandpa Joe made a mistake? Maybe my parents were right about me being irresponsible and impractical. 3 months in, I was ready to throw in the towel. I'd had enough of feeling like a fraud in my own inheritance. The farm was slowly eating through what little savings I had, and I was starting to understand why my parents had been so focused on stable careers and retirement plans. That's when despair became my roommate. Not the dramatic, movie kind of despair. Just the quiet, grinding kind that makes you question every choice you've ever made. It was one of those California scorcher days when even the lizards were looking for shade. The kind of heat that makes you wonder why anyone thought living in a desert was a good idea. I was in the old barn, trying to fix a piece of equipment that had more rust than metal, when I knocked over a dusty cardboard box. Paper scattered everywhere like confetti at the world's most boring party. That's when I saw it. Tucked between old receipts and farming catalogs was this beat-up leather notebook. It was held together by what looked like a rubber band that had seen better decades. The cover was worn smooth, the kind of smooth that only comes from years of handling. I picked it up, and something about the weight of it felt important. Significant. The notebook smelled like history, dust, old paper, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe hope? If hope had a smell, this would be it. The pages were yellowed, and some were loose, but every single one was filled with Grandpa Joe's handwriting. His careful, methodical script that I remember from grocery lists and birthday cards. But this wasn't grocery lists. This was treasure. The first few pages were what you'd expect. Citrus varieties, planting schedules, weather observations. Farmer stuff. But as I flipped through, it became clear this wasn't just any farming journal. These were blueprints for something bigger. Sketches of roadside stands. Old photographs tucked between pages showing Route 66 in its heyday. Hand-drawn logos and label designs. Recipe after recipe for drinks I'd never heard of. Each page whispered stories about the golden age of American road trips. Pictures of families in station wagons. Kids with sticky fingers and sun-kissed faces. Gas station attendants in crisp uniforms. This was more than a notebook. It was a time capsule. And then I found the bombshell. The last page wasn't a recipe or a sketch. It was a letter, written in Grandpa Joe's unmistakable handwriting, but shakier than usual, like he'd written it when his hands weren't quite steady anymore. The words hit me like a freight train running on pure emotion. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means they kicked you out. I figured they would. Don't give up, kid. Real inheritance isn't land. It's spirit. The spirit of someone who isn't afraid to walk their own path. Remember what Mark Twain said, the secret of getting ahead is getting started. And here's something else. Behind the old toolbox, there's a yellowed envelope. Inside is a contract with the Route 66 Association from 1962 that gives rights to use the name for beverages. I believe you'd find it. I sat there in that dusty barn, holding a letter from beyond the grave, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not break. Crack open like an egg revealing new life. Grandpa Joe had known. He'd seen this coming. The family drama, the rejection, the isolation, and he'd left me breadcrumbs to find my way through the forest. I practically tore that barn apart looking for the toolbox. Found it wedged behind a pile of irrigation pipes, covered in spider webs and 30 years of dust. And there it was, a manila envelope so old it looked like parchment, sealed with tape that crumbled at my touch. Inside was a legal document that made my hands shake as I read it. Certificate of Licensing Agreement between Joseph Marshall and Route 66 Heritage Beverage Association. Dated June 15, 1962. Exclusive rights to produce and market beverages under the Sunburst Route 66 brand name. This wasn't just a farm. This was a legacy with legal teeth. I realized Grandpa Joe hadn't just left me a farm. He'd left me a mission. This was his final lesson, his last adventure, and I was supposed to be the hero of this story. The notebook wasn't just memories. It was a blueprint for bringing those memories back to life. For the first time since moving to the farm, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: purpose. The next few days were a blur of research and experimentation. I turned that kitchen into something between a laboratory and a deli, with mason jars covering every surface and the air thick with the smell of citrus and ambition. Grandpa Joe's recipes weren't just instructions. They were philosophy lessons disguised as beverage formulas. I started with the basics. Meyer lemons because they were sweeter. Eureka lemons for that sharp bite. Local honey instead of processed sugar because, as Grandpa Joe had written in red ink, bees know more about perfection than factories do. Every recipe came with notes about feeling rather than measuring. The main thing about lemonade is the feeling. You have to feel its soul, not just measure ingredients. My first few attempts were disasters. Too sweet, too sour, too weird. I made something that tasted like liquid sunshine mixed with regret. Another batch that could have doubled as furniture polish. The sink became a graveyard of failed experiments. But I kept going because failure felt different now. It felt like progress. I added mint from the overgrown herb garden, wild blackberries from the fence line, fresh ginger because Grandpa Joe's notes mention it added warmth that starts in your stomach and spreads to your memories. Slowly, very slowly, something magical started happening in those mason jars. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening when the sun was setting over the groves, and the air smelled like possibility. I'd been working on a batch that combined everything I'd learned, the perfect balance of sweet and tart, with just enough herbal complexity to make you pause and think. I took a sip and nearly cried, not because it was perfect, but because it tasted like home. Like summer afternoons and road trips, and everything good about being young and American. I understood then what Grandpa Joe had been trying to tell me all along. This wasn't about making drinks. This was about making memories, about connecting people to something real in a world that was becoming increasingly artificial. That lemonade didn't just quench thirst. It told a story. And for the first time since inheriting the farm, I knew exactly what story I wanted to tell. I called it Sunburst Lemonade in honor of Grandpa Joe's original vision. Each sip was designed to transport people back to the golden age of Route 66, when a journey was just as important as a destination, and every mile marker had its own personality. The label design came straight from Grandpa Joe's sketches, simple, classic, with a silhouette of an old pickup truck against a sunset horizon. As I sat on the porch that night, watching fireflies dance between the citrus trees and sipping my creation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Grandpa Joe had given me more than recipes and legal documents. He'd given me a roadmap back to myself. The farm still had problems. Money was still tight. I still didn't know what I was doing half the time. But now I had something I didn't have before, a plan, and hope. Real, tangible hope that tasted like summer and smelled like adventure. Tomorrow, I'd start working on taking this dream from my kitchen to the world. But tonight, I was going to sit here and appreciate the miracle of finding your purpose hidden in a dusty barn. Sometimes the best treasures are the ones that find you when you're not looking for them. And sometimes your grandfather's biggest gift isn't what he leaves you in his will. It's what he hides in plain sight, waiting for you to be ready to discover it. The breakthrough came when I stopped overthinking and started trusting my gut. 3 weeks of nonstop experimentation had turned my kitchen into a citrus war zone, but suddenly everything clicked. The perfect Meyer to Eureka ratio. Wild blackberry for complexity. Fresh ginger for that kick that made people pause and say, "What is that?" This wasn't just another lemonade recipe. This was liquid storytelling. I spent days perfecting the packaging. Found these vintage-style mason jars in estate sale, the kind with thick glass and metal lids that made a satisfying pop when opened. The labels were hand-designed based on Grandpa Joe's sketches. Clean classic, featuring his old pickup truck silhouette against a sunset backdrop. Every design choice had meaning. The truck wasn't just decoration. It represented the journey, the adventure, the freedom that Route 66 symbolized. That Route 66 Association contract became my golden ticket. Legal rights to use Sunburst Route 66 Lemonade as my brand name. Suddenly, I wasn't just some guy with citrus trees. I was the official keeper of an American legend. Registration paperwork took forever, but when those trademark documents came back approved, I felt like I'd just been knighted by the ghost of American entrepreneurship. The county farmers market was my testing ground. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. setup, hand shaking as I arranged those mason jars like they were made of crystal. My hand-painted banner read, Sunburst Orchard, authentic Route 66 experience in every sip. The first hour was brutal. People walked by like I was selling invisible products. I started questioning everything again. Then this little kid, maybe 7 years old, dragged his mom over and pointed at my setup like he'd spotted buried treasure. One taste, and his face lit up brighter than a Christmas tree. He whispered something to his mom that made her smile, and by 6 jars, that kid became my first unofficial marketing team. Word of mouth in small towns travels faster than wildfire. But the real validation came from the senior crowd. These folks had actually lived through the 60s, driven the real Route 66, experienced what I was trying to recreate. When a 70-something woman tasted my lemonade and got tears in her eyes, telling me it reminded her of family road trips and simpler times, I knew I'd struck gold. I wasn't selling refreshment. I was selling time travel. Within a month, I had customers driving from 3 counties away just to buy my lemonade. The local newspaper ran a feature calling me the young entrepreneur bringing vintage America back to life. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know the story behind the guy with the magic recipe. Success felt weird. Good weird, but weird nonetheless. That's when Tessa walked into my life and changed everything. She approached my stand on a busy Saturday, but she wasn't browsing like other customers. She moved with purpose, like someone who'd done her research. Professional but approachable. Business casual with just enough farm girl authenticity to fit right in at a farmer's market. Tessa didn't just taste my lemonade, she interviewed it, asked about production methods, ingredient sourcing, scalability potential. Questions I'd never considered, but probably should have. She spoke business fluent in a way that made my high school economics education feel inadequate. Most people said this is delicious. Tessa said this could be huge. We ended up talking for 3 hours. She'd grown up on a farm too, understood the agricultural side, but she'd also studied business and marketing. She saw opportunities where I saw obstacles, distribution channels where I saw complications, growth strategies where I saw overwhelming complexity. When she suggested we grab coffee and really talk about possibilities, I said yes faster than a reflex. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late-night strategy sessions in her apartment, surrounded by business books and laptops, trying to figure out how to transform my kitchen operation into something sustainable and scalable. Tessa had this gift for taking my scattered ideas and organizing them into actual plans, marketing strategies, financial projections, operational workflows that made sense on paper and might actually work in reality. Her parents weren't just farmers. They were agricultural entrepreneurs who'd built their own successful operation from scratch. When Tessa brought me to Sunday dinner, and I explained my vision, they didn't just nod politely. They asked smart questions about market research, competition analysis, and capital requirements. 2 weeks later, they offered to invest. Not just money, but mentorship connections and access to their network of suppliers and distributors. With real funding came real possibilities. We leased a commercial space, an old auto repair shop that we transformed into our production facility. Industrial-grade bottling equipment, commercial refrigeration, health department certifications that required more paperwork than my college applications. Hiring employees felt like assembling a team for a mission. We needed people who understood that we weren't just manufacturing beverages. We were preserving cultural heritage one bottle at a time. Our first grocery store placement happened almost by accident. The manager of a local chain had tried our lemonade at the farmer's market and asked if we could supply his stores. Suddenly, we went from selling dozens of jars per week to fulfilling orders for hundreds. Seeing our product on actual store shelves was surreal. professional shelf space next to major brands, our vintage-inspired labels standing out like time travelers who'd somehow infiltrated the modern beverage aisle. The response exceeded our wildest projections. Customers weren't just buying our lemonade. They were sharing stories about it on social media, recommending it to friends, using it for special occasions. Food bloggers started featuring us in articles about authentic American experiences and nostalgic beverages making a comeback. We'd accidentally tapped into something deeper than thirst. We'd found that sweet spot where quality meets nostalgia, meets genuine emotional connection. Tessa proved to be more than just a business partner. She was my strategic compass, always thinking 2 steps ahead while I was still figuring out step 1. When problems arose, and they always did, she already had contingency plans mapped out. Supply chain issues? She'd already identified backup suppliers. Seasonal demand fluctuations? She developed promotional strategies to smooth out the curves. Regulatory compliance headaches? She'd built relationships with the right people to navigate bureaucratic mazes. By month 6, we were shipping to stores across 4 states. The warehouse operated around the clock during peak seasons. Our employee count had grown from just me and Tessa to a team of 15 people who believed in what we were building. Revenue numbers that had seemed impossible just months earlier became our monthly reality. Profit margins that made our accountants smile, and our investors eager to discuss expansion opportunities. But the real measure of success wasn't financial metrics. It was the handwritten letters from customers. Stories about 3-generation family reunions where our lemonade sparked conversations about family history. Tales from travelers who discovered us and now made special stops just to stock up for road trips. We'd become custodians of American memory, translating the spirit of Route 66 into something people could taste and share and pass down to their children. Standing in our bustling facility late one evening, watching the night crew prepare shipments for tomorrow's deliveries, I thought about how far I'd traveled from that lonely farmhouse where I'd questioned every decision I'd ever made. Grandpa Joe's forgotten notebook had become a business blueprint. His abandoned dreams had become our thriving reality. Tessa stood beside me, reviewing production schedules and smiling that smile that had first caught my attention at the farmer's market. We'd built something beautiful together. Not just a company, but a partnership that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The future stretched ahead like an open highway, full of possibilities we were just beginning to explore. As Henry Ford once said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." We'd chosen to think we could, and that choice had transformed everything. The taste of success was better than any recipe could capture, and we were just getting started on this incredible journey. Year 2 hit us like a rocket ship, with its engines set to maximum thrust. We'd gone from scrappy startup to what felt like the Silicon Valley of the lemonade industry. Orders were flooding in from retailers across the country. Not just mom-and-pop stores anymore, but major regional chains wanted to carry our brand. The numbers were intoxicating. Revenue projections that made our accountant do actual happy dances in his office. We'd outgrown our converted auto shop and moved into a legitimate production facility. State-of-the-art bottling lines, temperature-controlled storage, quality control stations that would make a pharmaceutical company jealous. Watching our operation hum with mechanical precision felt like witnessing a miracle we'd somehow conjure from mason jars and determination. Our team had expanded to 35 employees, each one carefully selected not just for skills but for understanding our mission. That's when Brett joined us. Smooth talker, impressive resume, came with glowing recommendations from his previous food industry positions. He interviewed like he'd been born to work in beverage production, spoke our language about quality and authenticity, even shared stories about his own family's connection to Route 66. I hired him as our head of operations without a second thought. Big mistake. Brett integrated seamlessly into our operation, showed up early, stayed late, asked all the right questions about efficiency improvements and cost optimizations. He seemed genuinely passionate about our brand story and mission. For 6 months, he was a model employee, the kind of person you hope to clone when you're building a company culture. In business, like in the jungle, there's always someone looking to bite off a piece of your success. I just never expected the teeth to belong to someone sitting at our own conference table. The betrayal started small, probably a conversation here, a casual question there. Brett began asking increasingly detailed questions about our recipes, our supplier relationships, our proprietary processes. Questions that seemed natural coming from someone responsible for operations, but were actually intelligence gathering for a very different purpose. Turns out, Global Beverage Corporation had noticed our rapid growth and decided they wanted a piece of nostalgic beverage market we'd helped create. Global Beverage wasn't interested in competing with us fairly. They wanted to crush us by stealing everything that made us unique and mass-producing cheaper versions with their distribution muscle. Brett was their inside man, feeding them information about our trade secrets in exchange for what I can only assume was a significant payday. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd spent 2 years building something authentic and original, only to have corporate vultures try to steal it to the oldest trick in the book: human greed. Tessa had this quirky habit of creating detailed digital archives of everything. She was obsessed with documenting our company's evolution, constantly taking photos and videos of our daily operations for what she called our future documentary. Every recipe test, every employee training session, every production milestone got recorded and organized into meticulously labeled cloud folders. What started as her passion project for preserving our company history would become our corporate salvation. The discovery happened during one of her regular digital organization sessions. Tessa was reviewing months of archived footage when she noticed something that made her pause. In the background of a routine production video, there was Brett photographing our recipe boards with his personal phone during what should have been his lunch break. At first, she thought maybe he was just proud of his work and wanted to share it with friends or family. But as she kept searching through the archives, a disturbing pattern emerged. Brett wasn't taking casual snapshots. He was methodically documenting every aspect of our proprietary processes: recipe formulations, supplier contact information, quality control procedures, even our marketing strategies. Tessa's comprehensive documentation had accidentally created a surveillance system that captured weeks of systematic theft disguised as dedicated employment. The evidence was devastating and undeniable. Brett copying recipe cards, Brett photographing supplier invoices, Brett taking detailed notes during our strategy meetings, and then stepping outside to make phone calls immediately afterward. Watching those archive videos felt like discovering your most trusted friend had been robbing you blind while smiling to your face. This person I brought into our inner circle, given access to everything we'd worked so hard to build, had been selling us out for corporate profit. The betrayal tasted more bitter than an unripe lemon left to rot in the sun. But Tessa, brilliant strategic mind that she was, convinced me to channel that anger into something more productive than just firing Brett and hoping for the best. We needed to protect not just our current business, but our future. We needed to make an example that would deter other corporate predators from targeting small businesses like ours. We documented everything, made copies of all the digital evidence, built a comprehensive case that would stand up in court and send a message to anyone else considering corporate espionage. The confrontation was swift and decisive. We didn't just fire Brett. We did it with a full orchestra of legal consequences. Our attorney, a sharp veteran of corporate litigation who looked like he'd been seasoned by decades of courtroom battles, presented our evidence with the precision of a master craftsman. The case was ironclad. Video evidence, documented theft of trade secrets, clear violation of his employment contract and non-disclosure agreements. Global Beverage Corporation tried to play innocent, claiming they had no knowledge of Brett's activities and couldn't be held responsible for the actions of a rogue individual. But our investigation had uncovered email trails and payment records that told a different story. Our lawyer dismantled their defense piece by piece, arguing that real value isn't just ingredients and processes. It's history, spirit, and legacy built through honest work and authentic passion. The victory was complete and satisfying. Brett faced serious legal consequences for corporate espionage. Global Beverage Corporation paid substantial damages and was forced to sign agreements preventing them from entering our market segment for 5 years. We protected not just our business, but our integrity. More importantly, We'd proven that small businesses with authentic products and strong legal preparation could stand up to corporate bullying and win. The experience strengthened our partnership in ways I hadn't expected. Tessa and I had weathered our first serious business crisis together and emerged not just intact, but more united than before. We'd faced a storm that could have destroyed everything we'd built, and instead it made us stronger, like an oak tree that grows deeper roots after surviving a hurricane. The legal victory also sent a message to our industry. Word spread quickly about the small lemonade company that had successfully defended itself against corporate theft. By year 3, we'd reached a milestone that seemed impossible when I was living alone on that farm, questioning every decision I'd ever made. Tessa and I had become millionaires, not just on paper, but in actual, tangible wealth that represented years of hard work, smart decisions, and refusing to compromise our values for quick profits. The original farm had been completely transformed into a modern production campus while maintaining its historic character. Standing in our executive offices, looking out over a facility where dozens of employees worked to produce thousands of bottles daily, I couldn't help but think about Grandpa Joe. What had once been my refuge had become our fortress. He would have smiled seeing how his small farm had grown into an operation capable of bringing joy to customers across the entire country. The boy who'd been kicked out of his family for following his dreams had become a man who built an empire on those same dreams. Success tastes different when you've earned it through adversity. Every bottle we produced carried not just a flavor of nostalgia, but the satisfaction of knowing we protected something precious through intelligence, preparation, and unwavering commitment to our principles. As Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." We demonstrated that courage when it mattered most, and the rewards were sweeter than any recipe could capture. But even as we celebrated our achievements, I knew this was just a beginning. The business world had taught us that success attracts both admirers and predators. We'd proven we could handle the predators, and now it was time to see how high our authentic American dream could soar. Just when we'd gotten used to Forbes calling for interviews and Wall Street Journal reporters wanting to write feature stories about our authentic American success story, the big leagues came knocking. And I mean the biggest league of them all, PepsiCo. $15 million. That's what they offered for Sunburst Orchard. $15 million. The meeting happened in their corporate headquarters, all glass and steel, and the kind of polished intimidation that makes you feel like you're negotiating with the future itself. Their executives wore suits that probably cost more than my first car and spoke in corporate language, so smooth it could have been bottled and sold as premium lubricant. They'd done their homework, knew our revenue numbers, our growth trajectory, our market penetration statistics. They wanted to acquire our brand, our recipes, our story, and fold it all into their massive distribution empire. Sitting in that conference room, listening to them talk about synergistic opportunities and leveraging our brand equity across their portfolio, I felt my internal compass spinning like a broken GPS. This was life-changing money, generational wealth, the kind of payday that could set me and Tessa up for the rest of our lives. But something in Grandpa Joe's voice kept echoing in my head. "Ethan, if you sell your soul for easy money, then it never really belonged to you in the first place." The PepsiCo executives painted a beautiful picture: global distribution, marketing budgets bigger than our entire annual revenue, professional management teams. All I had to do was sign the papers and walk away with more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. They made it sound so logical, so inevitable. Why struggle with the complexities of growing a business when you could cash out and let the professionals handle everything? I asked for time to think about it, drove back to the farm in Grandpa Joe's old pickup truck, which now seemed quaint compared to corporate jets and executive sedans I'd just left behind. But as soon as I got home and saw those lemon trees, saw the facility we'd built from nothing, saw Tessa waiting for me with that smile that could power a small city, I knew what my answer would be. Some things aren't for sale, not at any price. I looked at Tessa, at those citrus groves, at the label featuring Grandpa Joe's truck silhouette against the sunset. I realized there are things you can't buy for $15 million. Legacy isn't a price tag, it's a story. And success, like lemonade, should be savored slowly, not chugged in one desperate gulp. The next morning, I called PepsiCo and declined their offer. The silence on the other end of the phone was so profound, I could practically hear their calculators short-circuiting. Instead of selling out, we decided to double down, use our accumulated profits to expand even further, to build something that could compete with the corporate giants on our own terms. We were going to prove that authentic, family-owned businesses could thrive in a world dominated by multinational corporations. That decision changed everything. And apparently, it also got someone's attention back home. After 3 years of radio silence, my family suddenly remembered I existed. Funny how million-dollar success stories have a way of refreshing people's memories about relatives they've written off as failures. The first contact came through a carefully worded email from my mother, full of subtle manipulations disguised as concern for my well-being. She'd heard about our success through mutual acquaintances and wanted to reconnect and heal old wounds. The tone shifted quickly when I didn't immediately respond with enthusiasm about family reunification. Soon the emails became more demanding, full of legal threats about improper inheritance procedures and claims that Grandpa Joe wasn't mentally competent when he wrote his will. They talked about fair distribution and how the farm should have been split equally among all grandchildren. Same old song, different verse. The final confrontation came during our grand opening celebration for the new expanded facility. We'd planned this big event to showcase our growth, invite local dignitaries, celebrate with our employees and their families. It was supposed to be our moment of triumph, our public declaration that the American dream was alive and well. That's when they showed up, unannounced, uninvited, and dressed like they were attending a corporate board meeting instead of a family business celebration. My parents marched in with the kind of determined expressions people wear when they're about to ruin someone's day. Behind them walked Olivia, looking every inch the successful businesswoman she'd become, but something in her posture seemed different, less certain than I remembered. Their arrival created an immediate tension that cut through our celebration like a knife through birthday cake. The accusations came fast and furious. Claims about manipulation and undue influence. Demands for financial records and business valuations. Threats about lawsuits and legal challenges that could tie up our operation for years. They'd brought a lawyer with them, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he specialized in family destruction disguised as legal representation. But here's the thing about building something from nothing. It teaches you to stand your ground when people try to take what you've earned. I'd learned lessons about strength and resilience that my comfortable suburban upbringing never could have taught me. I smiled, calmly, serenely, like someone who'd found peace with himself and didn't need anyone else's approval to feel whole. I referenced Grandpa Joe's words, the legal documents he'd so carefully prepared, and even threw in some wisdom about how true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the person you become while earning those dollars. Standing beside me was Tessa, now my wife, my rock, my partner in every sense of the word. Her presence reminded me that I'd built more than just a business. I'd built a life filled with purpose and love. My parents' faces looked like they'd been sucking on unripe lemons, sour and pinched with disappointment. Their lawyer shuffled his papers nervously when he realized our legal foundation was stronger than their emotional manipulation tactics. They left empty-handed, their corporate-style intimidation having failed completely against someone who'd learned to find strength in authenticity rather than approval. Watching their car disappear down the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Olivia in the passenger seat. For just a moment, our eyes met through the rear window, and I saw something that looked almost like regret, or maybe recognition that she'd never experienced the kind of internal freedom I'd found by choosing my own path instead of following their predetermined route. She'd succeeded by their standards, but remained trapped by their expectations. I'd failed by their standards, but found genuine happiness in my rebellion. Standing in the middle of our bustling facility, surrounded by the hum production machinery and the sweet aroma of citrus, I watched Tessa's radiant smile and understood something profound about inheritance and legacy. Grandpa Joe hadn't given me a farm. He'd given me a chance. And a chance is the greatest gift imaginable if you know how to squeeze every drop of potential from it. Real legacy isn't about material possessions or bank account balances. It's about what you build with your own hands and what you preserve in your heart. It's about staying true to yourself, staying true to your dreams, and staying true to the people who believe in you when nobody else will. As Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Our story was just beginning, like a new dawn breaking over Sunburst orchard, full of promises and adventures yet to be discovered. We'd proven that authentic dreams, combined with hard work and unwavering principles, could create something beautiful and lasting in a world that often values profit over purpose. The taste of true success was better than any recipe could capture, and sweeter than any corporate buyout could provide. Some inheritances come in the form of money or property. Others come in the form of courage and the wisdom to use it. Grandpa Joe had given me both, and I'd finally learned how to honor his gift by becoming the man he'd always believed I could be. The lemon trees whispered their approval in the California breeze, and somewhere in that sound, I could swear I heard Grandpa Joe chuckling with satisfaction at a job well done.